The mess hall of the Steadfast Horizon was never quiet during the evening meal. Soldiers from 6 different species gathered around long metal tables, eating food that had been processed to meet their various biological needs. The air smelled like copper and salt, and something vaguely sweet that they seemed to enjoy. Danny sat alone at a corner table, working through a plate of reconstituted protein that almost tasted like chicken. He was 53 years old, with gray hair cut short, and a face that had seen too much sun and too many bad days. His hands were rough, across the knuckles, and he moved with the careful economy of a man who had learned that wasted motion could get you killed. He had served 30 years in the Marine Corps before retiring. Now he worked as a cultural liaison aboard this coalition ship, helping different species understand each other. It was quiet work. He preferred it that way. Across the mess hall, a group of soldiers had gathered around a display screen. They were massive creatures, each one standing over 8 feet tall, covered in scales that ranged from deep green to almost black. Their eyes were yellow and slitted like a snake's, and their teeth were made for tearing meat. Lieutenant stood at the center of the group, his voice loud and sharp with amusement. "Look at this," said, pointing at the screen. "Human entertainment, they call these stories legends." The screen showed an old Earth film about ancient warriors, 300 soldiers holding a mountain pass against an army of thousands. Danny recognized it. He had seen it many times, back when he was young, and still believed that courage was something you could learn from movies. Commander Thresh moved closer to watch. She was, which meant she had 4 arms, compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could not imagine, and a mind that processed information faster than any computer Danny had ever used. She was also deeply convinced that humans were the weakest species in the galactic concord. "Fascinating," Thresh said, her voice clicking slightly as she spoke. "They truly believe these stories represent their nature." Laughed. It was an ugly sound like rocks grinding together. 300 soldiers defeating an empire, humans running through fire, men surviving wounds that would kill any sensible creature. He shook his massive head. Delusions, nothing more than delusions from a fragile species. Several other aliens joined the laughter. A pair of soldiers, their bodies covered in thick gray hide, made sounds of agreement. Even some of the who rarely expressed emotion seemed to find the whole thing amusing. Thresh pulled up her and began reading statistics out loud. "Human biology is remarkably unimpressive," she said, "slower than by a factor of 3, weaker than by a factor of 5, less durable than by a factor that is difficult to calculate because are made of silicon." She looked up, her compound eyes reflecting the light in strange patterns. "Humans have no natural weapons, no claws, no venom, no armor, they cannot even see in the dark. And yet they tell stories of great warriors," said, his tone dripping with mockery. "Heroes who fight gods, soldiers who never retreat, men who keep fighting after they should be dead." He turned to face the few humans scattered around the mess hall. "Tell me, soft ones, do you actually believe these tales?" Most of the humans looked away. They had learned that arguing with soldiers was pointless. The aliens were bigger, stronger, and completely convinced of their own superiority. Maria Vance, a young ensign with dark hair and sharp eyes, sat at a table near the display. She was 26 years old and had been assigned to the Steadfast Horizon only 3 months ago. Her hands tightened around her cup as she listened to the mockery, but she said nothing. She had been told to keep the peace. She had been told that human dignity was less important than coalition unity. She hated it. Danny watched all of this from his corner. He turned a worn coin over in his fingers, feeling the familiar weight of it. The coin was old, scratched and faded, with an eagle on one side and words he had memorized long ago on the other. It was a challenge coin from his old unit. He had carried it for 27 years. Noticed him. The lieutenant walked across the mess hall, his heavy footsteps making the floor vibrate slightly. He stopped in front of Danny's table and looked down with obvious contempt. "You," said, "Old human, you have the look of a soldier. Tell me, do you have any myths to share? Any stories of impossible human courage?" Danny looked up. His eyes were calm, steady, the color of weathered stone. He studied the alien for a long moment, taking in the scales, the teeth, the arrogant tilt of the massive head. "They're not myths," Danny said quietly. Blinked. Then he laughed again, louder this time, and the other aliens joined him. "Not myths. You expect us to believe that humans can do the things in these stories, that your species, which cannot even survive a fall from a moderate height, produces warriors who fight like demons." Danny shrugged. "Believe what you want." "I believe in biology," Thresh said, moving closer. "I believe in physics. I believe in the measurable limits of flesh and bone. And by every measurement, humans are among the weakest sentient species ever discovered." Danny nodded slowly, as if considering her words. Then he returned to his meal. "Okay," he said. The alien seemed confused by his lack of argument, leaned closer, his breath hot and smelling of copper. "You have nothing to say, no defense of your pathetic species." Danny took another bite of his food. He chewed slowly, swallowed, and then looked up at the again. "I've got nothing to prove to you," he said, "and you wouldn't believe me anyway, so I'm going to finish my dinner." He returned to his meal, and after a moment of frustrated silence, the aliens walked away. They continued their mockery at the display screen, laughing at more human stories, more human legends, more human myths. Maria Vance watched Danny from across the room. She saw something in the old man's eyes that the aliens had missed. It was not shame or embarrassment or defeat. It was patience. The kind of patience that came from knowing something that others did not. She wondered what he knew. Danny finished his meal alone. He put the challenge coin back in his pocket and carried his tray to the recycler. As he walked past Maria's table, he paused for just a moment. "Don't let them get to you," he said softly. "Words don't mean much, actions do." Then he was gone, walking out of the mess hall with the slow, steady pace of a man who had all the time in the world. The aliens continued laughing. They had no idea what was coming. The moon had no name, only a number. It was a dead rock covered in gray dust and ancient craters, orbiting a gas giant that no one had bothered to explore. Intelligence reports suggested that the hollow swarm had built a small nest somewhere in the northern hemisphere. The mission was simple: land, investigate, confirm the presence of the enemy, and call for reinforcements if necessary. Nothing about it was supposed to be dangerous. Danny sat in the transport shuttle with 5 other soldiers. Lieutenant was there, still arrogant, still dismissive, checking his plasma rifle with the casual confidence of someone who had never been truly afraid. Al, another warrior, sat beside him. He was older than quieter, with scars across his snout that spoke of battles survived. 2 scouts completed the alien side of the team. They were smaller than Thresh, their bodies built for speed and stealth rather than analysis. They did not speak much. Maria Vance sat across from Danny, her hand steady on her rifle, her jaw tight with nervous energy. She had never faced the swarm before. She had heard stories, but stories were just words. Danny had faced them twice. He knew that words could never capture what they were really like. The shuttle landed in a cloud of gray dust. The squad moved out in formation, weapons ready, scanning the barren landscape for any sign of movement. The nest was supposed to be underground, in a network of tunnels that the swarm had carved into the moon's crust. They found the entrance after 20 minutes of walking. It was a hole in the ground, perfectly circular, descending into darkness. The edges were smooth, almost polished, marked with strange patterns that seemed to shift when you looked at them directly. Took point. He was the ranking officer, and culture demanded that leaders face danger first. Danny respected that, even if he did not respect much else about the alien. They descended into the tunnels. The darkness was absolute. Their helmet lights cut through it in narrow beams, revealing walls covered in the same strange patterns, floors coated in something that crunched beneath their boots. The air smelled wrong, sweet and rotten at the same time, and the temperature dropped as they went deeper. Maria stayed close to Danny. He could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, and he remembered what that felt like. The first time in a dark place, not knowing what was waiting ahead. "Stay calm," he said quietly. "Breathe slow, watch your corners." She nodded, grateful for the advice. They found the main chamber after 30 minutes of walking. It was vast, larger than any space had a right to be this far underground, and it was full of eggs. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. They covered the floor, the walls, the ceiling, pulsing with a faint bioluminescence that made the whole chamber glow with sickly green light. Cursed in his own language, this was not a small nest, this was a breeding ground. "We need to leave," Danny said. "Right now, call for extraction." Opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, the eggs began to hatch. The swarm came out of the walls. They came out of the floor. They came out of the darkness in a wave of claws and teeth and hunger that seemed to have no end. They were nightmares given flesh, each one the size of a large dog, with too many legs and mouths that opened in 3 directions at once. The squad opened fire. Plasma bolts lit up the chamber. Bullets tore through chitinous bodies. The scouts moved with incredible speed, their 4 arms wielding weapons in a blur of coordinated violence. Al roared and charged into the horde, his massive body crushing creatures beneath his feet. But there were too many. Took a hit to his leg. A swarm creature had gotten past his guard, its claws tearing through the scales and muscle of his thigh. He went down hard, his rifle flying from his hands, and the creatures swarmed toward him like sharks sensing blood. Danny moved without thinking. He grabbed by the harness and hauled him backward, firing his rifle one-handed into the mass of creatures that followed. That was heavy, impossibly heavy, but Danny did not stop. He dragged the alien through the tunnel, his boots slipping on the strange floor, his arms screaming with the effort. A creature slashed at his ribs. He felt the pain, felt the warmth of blood running down his side and kept moving. Another creature bit into his shoulder. He shot it in the head, the jaws open with his free hand, and kept moving. Something was wrong with his left hand. He could not feel 2 of his fingers. He did not look down to see why. Maria appeared at his side, her rifle blazing. "Go," she screamed. "I'll cover you." Danny went. He carried through the tunnel, following Al and the scouts, leaving a trail of blood behind him that was both red and green, human and mixed together on the alien stone. They reached a defensible position near the surface, a narrow passage with only one entrance, easy to hold against the horde. Danny sat down against the wall and immediately began applying field dressing to the alien's wound. Stared at him. His yellow eyes were wide with something that might have been shock. "You carried me," said. His voice was rough, confused. "You are smaller than me, weaker. How did you carry me?" Danny did not answer. He was focused on stopping the bleeding, on keeping the alien alive, on doing the job that needed to be done. Al watched from across the passage. He had seen everything. He had seen the human take wounds that should have dropped him, seen him lift a weight that should have been impossible, seen him keep moving when any sensible creature would have stopped. "Human," Al said slowly, "you are injured." Danny looked down at himself for the first time. The slash across his ribs was deep, showing white bone beneath the red meat. The puncture in his shoulder was still bleeding freely. His left hand was missing 2 fingers, severed cleanly at the second knuckle. "Yeah," Danny said. He sounded almost surprised. "I guess I am." Then he sat down heavily against the wall, closed his eyes for a moment, and asked, "Anyone have water? I'm really thirsty." Continued to stare at him. The arrogance was gone from his eyes now. In its place was something new, something that looked almost like the beginning of respect. Maria handed Danny a canteen. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "How are you still conscious?" she asked. "You should be in shock, you should be screaming." Danny took a long drink of water. He wiped his mouth with the back of his good hand and shrugged. "Adrenaline," he said. "Spite, take your pick." Outside, in the darkness of the tunnel, they could hear the swarm gathering. Thousands of creatures, waiting, hungry, patient. The squad was trapped, cut off from extraction, running low on ammunition. But Danny was still alive, still functional, still ready to fight. And somewhere in the back of Al's mind, a question began to form. A question about humans and their myths and what might actually be true. He did not ask it yet, but he would. Soon, the ruins were old beyond measuring. Stone walls carved with symbols that no species in the conquered could read, built by hands that had turned to dust long before any of them were born. The squad had retreated here after the tunnel became too dangerous, finding shelter in a chamber that still had a roof and walls thick enough to slow down the swarm. They could hear the creatures outside, scratching at the stone, waiting for their moment. Danny sat against the far wall, his wounds dressed with field bandages that were already soaked through with blood. The scouts had done what they could with their medical supplies, but it was not much. He needed a real doctor, a real hospital time to heal. He had none of those things. But he was still alive, still conscious, still watching the entrance with calm eyes, his rifle across his lap and his remaining fingers ready to pull the trigger. Al could not stop staring at him. The old warrior had seen many battles. He had fought the swarm before, had watched his own soldiers die screaming, had learned to respect the enemy for their terrible efficiency. He knew what wounds looked like, knew how bodies responded to damage, knew the limits of flesh and bone and will. Danny was beyond those limits. He should not be sitting there, calm and quiet, drinking water from a canteen as if he were waiting for a transport shuttle instead of a death he could not escape. Finally, Al asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Human," he said, "how are you still moving? How did you carry when you were already wounded? How do you sit there now, with half your blood on the floor and show no fear?" Danny looked up at him. In the dim light of their helmet lamps, his face was pale, drawn, marked with pain that he refused to acknowledge. "Training," Danny said, "experience, stubbornness." "That is not an answer." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he let out a long breath and leaned his head back against the ancient stone. "You want a real answer," he said. "Fine, I'll give you one." He closed his eyes, and when he spoke again, his voice was distant, like he was remembering something from very far away. "When I was 24 years old, I was in a city called. It was a war zone, buildings full of enemies, streets full of death. My squad got pinned down in an alley. 3 of my friends were hit in the first minute. One of them, a kid named, took a round through the stomach. He was screaming, bleeding out, and the enemy was closing in." Danny opened his eyes and looked at Al directly. "I picked up and carried him 6 blocks to the extraction point. I was shot twice along the way, once in the leg, once in the arm. I did not stop. I did not slow down. I got him to the medics and then I went back for the others." Al blinked. "You were shot twice and continued moving." "Yes." "How?" Danny shrugged with his good shoulder. "Because needed me, because the others needed me, because stopping meant they would die." He paused. "My body wanted to quit. My lungs were on fire. My leg felt like it was made of broken glass. But I told my body that it did not get a vote, and I kept moving." Maria, who had been listening in silence, spoke up. "That's not unique to him. Humans have been doing that forever." She pulled out her own, scrolling through files until she found what she was looking for. "My grandfather was in a place called the Reservoir. It was a war in a country called Korea, a long time ago. His unit was surrounded by enemy soldiers, outnumbered almost 10 to 1. The temperature was so cold that weapons froze, that men lost fingers and toes to the ice, that the dead did not rot because they were frozen solid within minutes. She looked up at the aliens, her eyes hard with something like pride. They fought their way out, 70 miles through enemy territory, through 7 enemy divisions in cold that would kill most species within hours. They did not surrender. They did not give up. They marched and fought and died, and the ones who survived kept marching and fighting until they reached safety. Who had been silent since Danny saved his life, finally spoke. His voice was quieter than before, stripped of its usual arrogance. "How many survived?" "Most of them," Maria said. "They called it the greatest military retreat in history, but my grandfather never called it a retreat. He called it an attack in a different direction." The scouts exchanged glances. One of them, the smaller one with pale green eyes, began tapping at her own. She was cross-referencing, searching human records looking for verification. What she found made her compound eyes widen. "These accounts are documented," she said slowly. "Medical records, military reports, video evidence. Humans surviving wounds that our biology models say should be fatal. Humans continuing to function under conditions that should cause immediate system failure." She looked at Danny with new eyes. "There are records of humans fighting with collapsed lungs, with severed limbs, with damage to internal organs that should cause unconsciousness within seconds. They do not stop. They continue until their bodies physically cannot move anymore, and sometimes even then they find ways to keep going." Danny nodded. "My old sergeant used to say that humans are too stupid to know when they're dead." He meant it as a compliment. Al sat down heavily, his massive body suddenly seeming smaller somehow. "The stories," he said, "the ones we laughed at, the warriors holding passes against armies, the soldiers charging into certain death, they are not myths." "No," Danny said, "they're history. Every culture on Earth has stories like that because every culture on Earth has done things like that. We're not special. We're just stubborn." Commander Thresh, who had been monitoring communications from their position, lowered her and looked at Danny with an expression that might have been respect. "Your species is not built for this," she said. "Your bodies are fragile. Your healing is slow. You have no natural advantages that would explain this level of endurance." Danny smiled, and it was a tired, painful expression that somehow managed to hold warmth. "You're right," he said. "We're not built for it. We do it anyway, because giving up means people we love will die, because surrender means the enemy wins, because somewhere deep down every human being has a voice that says, 'Not yet,' when death comes calling." He shifted his weight, wincing at the pain, and checked his rifle's ammunition count. "We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest or the toughest, but we might be the most stubborn, and sometimes that's enough." Outside, the swarm continued to scratch at the walls. The sound was constant, maddening, a reminder that death was waiting just beyond the ancient stone. But inside the ruins, something had changed. The aliens no longer looked at the humans with contempt. They looked at them with something closer to wonder. And perhaps, just perhaps, with the beginning of fear, the rescue shuttle never arrived. They heard the explosion from inside the ruins, a distant thunder that shook dust from the ancient ceiling and told them everything they needed to know. The swarm had anti-air capabilities that intelligence had not predicted. Their extraction was gone. Danny absorbed this information with a slow nod. He checked his rifle, counted his remaining ammunition, and looked at the others. "Secondary landing zone is 4 kilometers north," he said, "through the main tunnel network, through the nest." Still wounded but refusing to show weakness, shook his massive head. "That is suicide. The nest has thousands of creatures. We cannot fight through that." "We don't have a choice," Danny replied. "Stay here and we die slow. Go through the tunnels and we might die fast, but at least going through the tunnels gives us a chance." Al stood up, his armor clicking as the plates settled into position. "The human is right. I would rather die fighting than waiting." The scouts checked their weapons and exchanged a series of rapid clicks that served as their private language. When they were done, the smaller one looked at Danny and nodded. They were ready. Maria rose to her feet, her face pale but determined. Her ribs were cracked from the earlier fighting, wrapped tight with bandages that limited her breathing. She had not complained once. Danny smiled at her. "Stay behind me, watch my back. If I go down, keep moving." "You won't go down," she said. "Maybe not, but if I do, you keep moving anyway. That's an order." She nodded, and something passed between them that did not need words. A shared understanding of what might be coming, a mutual acceptance of the cost. Danny turned to Al. "You two stay in the middle, provide covering fire. The humans will take point." Started to protest, but Al put a hand on his shoulder. "Let them," the older said quietly. "I want to see what they can do." They moved out. The tunnels were darker than before, the bioluminescent glow of the eggs casting shadows that moved and shifted in ways that hurt to watch. Danny led the way, his rifle up, his remaining fingers steady on the trigger. Maria followed close behind, watching the angles he could not see. The swarm found them within minutes. They came from the walls again, pouring out of hidden passages, filling the tunnel with the clicking, chittering sound of 1,000 hungry mouths. Danny opened fire without hesitation, each shot precise, each bullet finding its target. The creatures fell, but more came to replace them. Maria fired beside him, her movements smooth despite the pain in her ribs. She had been trained for this, had practiced for years, but training was not the same as reality. Reality was louder. Reality smelled like copper and rot. Reality wanted to tear you apart and swallow the pieces. She kept firing anyway. Danny took a hit to his wounded shoulder. The creature's claw went straight through the bandage, into the already damaged flesh, and he felt something tear deep inside. He did not stop. He did not slow down. He grabbed the creature with his bad hand, ignoring the pain of missing fingers, and threw it into the mass of bodies behind it. Then he kept moving. Al watched in silence. He had seen warriors fight with honor, had seen assassins kill with precision, had seen the silicon bodies of the absorbed damage that would destroy organic life. But he had never seen anything like this. Danny was wounded in 7 places now. His blood left a trail on the tunnel floor that glowed faintly in the bioluminescent light. His breathing was ragged, wet, suggesting damage to his lungs. His left hand was a ruin of torn flesh and missing fingers. His leg had been slashed at some point, a wound that should make walking impossible. He was still fighting, still moving forward, still killing everything that got in his way. Maria took a hit that spun her around, a creature's claw catching her across the back and sending her stumbling into the wall. Danny turned instantly, put 3 rounds into the creature's head, and caught her before she could fall. "Can you move?" he asked. "Yes," she gasped, even though her face was white with pain. "Then move." They pushed through the tunnel, leaving bodies behind them. Danny's rifle ran dry, and he transitioned to his sidearm without missing a beat. When the sidearm ran dry, he drew his combat knife and kept fighting. Al saw him kill 3 creatures with that knife in less than 5 seconds. The human moved like water, flowing around attacks that should have connected, striking at weak points that should have been invisible. His technique was not elegant like it was brutal, efficient, designed for one purpose only: to keep killing until there was nothing left to kill. Commander Thresh, running calculations in her head even as she fired her own weapon, reached a conclusion that her rational mind could not accept. By every measurement she knew, Danny should be unconscious. His blood loss alone should have caused his body to shut down. The damage to his shoulder should have made his right arm useless. The wound in his leg should have made movement impossible. "He should be dead," she said out loud, not meaning to speak. Danny heard her. He laughed, and it was a wet, pained sound that ended in a cough. "Tell that to my legs," he said. They broke through to the surface. The secondary landing zone was visible in the distance, a flat expanse of gray dust where a shuttle could land. The sky above them was dark, filled with stars that did not care about the small creatures fighting for survival below. But between them and the landing zone, the ground began to shake. The Swarm Queen emerged from the earth like a nightmare being born. She was massive, twice the size of any creature they had fought, her body covered in armor that glistened with something that might have been mucus or might have been acid. Her mouth opened in 4 directions at once, revealing rings of teeth that went down into her throat as far as the eye could see. She screamed, and the sound was loud enough to make Maria's ears bleed. And Al raised their weapons, but the queen was fast, impossibly fast for something so large. She lunged toward the group, her claws extended, her body aimed directly at Maria. Danny did not hesitate. He stepped between them. Maria screamed his name, but he did not hear her. He was focused on the creature in front of him, on the death that was coming, on the choice he had made. He had promised to get them out. He intended to keep that promise. Even if it killed him, Danny did not try to kill the queen. He knew he could not. She was too big, too armored, too powerful for a single human with a combat knife and a body that was already falling apart. But killing her was not the point. The point was time. The point was giving the others a chance to escape. The queen's first strike came down like a falling tree. Danny raised what was left of his rifle, using the stock as a shield, and the impact shattered the weapon into pieces. The force threw him backward, but he rolled with it, coming up on his feet with his knife already in his hand. The queen screamed again and lunged. Danny dodged left, feeling the wind of her claws passing inches from his face. He stabbed upward, driving his knife into the soft tissue between 2 armor plates, and the creature shrieked with pain and rage. She hit him with her tail. He did not see it coming. The impact was like being struck by a ground vehicle, and he felt ribs crack as he flew through the air and landed hard on the gray dust of the moon's surface. For a moment he could not breathe. His body was telling him that it was done, that it had given everything it had, that there was nothing left to give. Danny told his body to shut up. He pushed himself to his knees, then to his feet. His knife was gone, lost somewhere in the dust, but that did not matter. He raised his fists instead, a ridiculous gesture against a creature that could swallow him whole. Maria was screaming at him to fall back. Al was firing his weapon at the queen, trying to draw her attention, was limping toward a defensive position, his injured leg dragging behind him. The scouts were running calculations, trying to find a weakness that did not exist. Danny ignored all of it. He focused on the queen, on the next attack, on surviving 1 more second. The queen charged again. Danny waited until the last possible moment, then dropped to the ground and rolled between her legs. He came up behind her and jumped onto her back, grabbing the knife that was still embedded between her armor plates. He pulled it free and stabbed again, and again, trying to find something vital. She bucked like an animal, trying to throw him off. Danny held on with one hand, his remaining fingers digging into the gaps between her plates, while his other hand kept stabbing. Blood sprayed across his face, thick and green and smelling of chemicals that burned his skin. She finally threw him. He hit the ground hard, and this time he did not get up immediately. He lay there, staring at the stars, feeling his body shutting down one system at a time. But the queen was hurt. She was bleeding from a dozen wounds, moving slower now, her screams weaker than before. Danny had bought them time. The shuttle arrived. It came down from the sky like an angel of salvation, its engines burning bright against the darkness. Door gunners opened fire on the queen, heavy weapons that tore through her armor and sent her reeling backward. She screamed one final time and retreated into the earth, unwilling to face this new threat. Maria ran to Danny's side. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against wounds that were too numerous to count. "Stay with me," she said. "Stay with me, Danny. The shuttle is here. We're going home." Danny looked up at her. His eyes were glazed with pain, but there was still something there, a spark that refused to go out. "Did we make it?" he asked. "Is everyone alive?" "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Everyone is alive because of you." Danny smiled. It was a small thing, barely visible beneath the blood and dirt that covered his face. "Good," he whispered. "That's good." The medics loaded him onto the shuttle. They worked frantically, injecting compounds that humans were not supposed to need, applying technologies that had been designed for species much stronger than mankind. Danny's heart stopped twice during the flight back to the steadfast horizon. Both times it started again. Commander Thresh stood in the medical bay, watching the human doctors fight to save Danny's life. Her showed the calculations she had run, the projections she had made, the biological models that said this man should have died hours ago. "He should be dead," she said again. It had become a statement she could not stop repeating. "His body has no right to still function." One of the human doctors looked at her with tired eyes. "Yeah," he said, "we get that a lot." Danny survived. It took 3 weeks of surgery and another 2 months of recovery, but he survived. His left hand was rebuilt with prosthetic fingers. His shoulder was repaired with synthetic tissue. The damage to his ribs and lungs was healed with techniques that they did not believe were possible. When he was finally cleared for visitors, came to see him. The lieutenant stood in the doorway of the medical bay for a long moment, looking at the human who had saved his life. Danny was sitting up in bed, reading something on looking tired but alive. "Human," said. Danny looked up. "Lieutenant." Walked into the room. His movements were slow, careful, as if he were approaching something dangerous. When he reached Danny's bedside, he stopped and stood in silence for several seconds. Then he bowed. It was a deep bow, the kind reserved for heroes in culture, the kind that acknowledged a debt that could never be repaid. When he straightened, his yellow eyes were bright with something that might have been tears. "I mocked your legends," said. "I called your species weak. I laughed at the stories of human courage." He paused. "I was wrong." Danny nodded slowly. "Okay." "You are not a species of weakness hiding behind stories," continued. "You are a species of monsters who pretend to be gentle. You wear soft skin and fragile bones, but underneath there is something that does not break, something that does not yield, something that makes even the swarm look tame by comparison." Danny was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into the drawer beside his bed and pulled out the old challenge coin, the one he had carried for 27 years. "Here," he said, holding it out. "To keep this." Took the coin carefully, as if it were made of something precious. He studied the eagle, the words, the scratches and wear marks that told a story of their own. "What is it?" he asked. "A tradition," Danny said. "We give these to people who have earned our respect, people who have fought beside us, people who have seen what we really are." Closed his massive hand around the coin. "I will treasure it." "Good, now you've got a story too." The news spread through the fleet. Soldiers from every species heard about what had happened on the nameless moon, about the human who had carried a twice his size, who had fought a queen with nothing but a knife and stubborn refusal to die. They began to look at the humans differently. They began to study human history, not as entertainment but as intelligence. They learned about Thermopylae and Stalingrad, about places called the Alamo and Normandy, about human soldiers who faced impossible odds and said, "No, we will not retreat, we will not surrender, we will not go quietly into the dark." They stopped laughing at human myths, because they finally understood the truth that Danny had tried to tell them from the beginning. The myths were not exaggerations. They were not stories invented by a weak species to make themselves feel strong. They were history. They were records of what humans had actually done, preserved so that future generations would know what was possible when ordinary people refused to give up. And if anything, the myths understated the reality, because the truth about humans was far more terrifying than any legend could capture. The truth was that humans were not special. They were not chosen by gods or blessed with magical powers. They were just ordinary creatures who had decided, somewhere in their evolutionary past, that death would have to work very hard to claim them. And sometimes, death gave up and walked away. Danny returned to duty 2 months later. He went back to his job as a cultural liaison, sitting in the corner of the mess hall, eating food that almost tasted like chicken. But now when he walked through the corridors of the steadfast horizon, alien soldiers stepped aside. They nodded to him with respect. Some of them even bowed. He never got used to it. He never wanted to. He was just a Marine who had done his job, who had kept his people alive, who had refused to quit when quitting would have been easy. That was all, that was everything. And somewhere in the depths of space, the hollow swarm learned to fear a new word. Human. They learned that this word meant something different from what they had believed. It did not mean weak or fragile or easy prey. It meant stubborn. It meant dangerous. It meant a species that would crawl through fire and blood and death itself rather than accept defeat. The swarm did not understand why. They could not comprehend a creature that would suffer so much for others, that would sacrifice everything for people it loved. Their minds did not work that way. But they learned to avoid human ships. They learned to retreat when humans were present. They learned that some prey was not worth the cost. And in the mess hall of the steadfast horizon, Danny finished his meal, put his challenge coin back in his pocket, and smiled. The myths were not myths. They never had been.